Look, this isn't about money. At least it doesn't feel like it at first. It starts with something much smaller. Two people wake up on the same Monday morning, same city, same age, same job level, same salary hitting their accounts on the same day every month. On paper, their lives are identical. They both feel a little tired. They both hit snooze once. They both think, I should probably be doing better by now. And neither of them is making a reckless decision. Here's the strange part. If you followed them for just 1 year, you wouldn't notice much difference at all. They eat at similar places. They take similar vacations. They complain about prices going up. They feel like they're doing what any reasonable person would do. Nothing looks wrong. Most people don't notice this happening because nothing dramatic ever happens in the beginning. No crisis, no warning sign, no moment where you think, this is the decision that changes everything. It's quieter than that. It's the kind of choice you make on autopilot, the kind you justify in under 5 seconds, the kind you stop thinking about the moment it's done. And that's why it's dangerous, because 10 years later, these two people won't just have different bank balances. They'll have different stress levels, different freedom, different options. One of them will feel like life is finally opening up. The other will feel like the walls are slowly closing in, without fully understanding why. And here's what makes this uncomfortable. If you asked either of them today, are you making bad financial decisions? They would both say no. They're not irresponsible. They're not careless. They're not chasing luxury. They're just doing what makes sense. This is the part most people miss. Your financial life isn't shaped by big dramatic mistakes. It's shaped by small decisions that feel reasonable, especially when everyone around you is making the same ones. And by the time the difference becomes obvious, the path has already been walked. The scary part isn't that one person did something wrong. It's that both of them did something normal. I'm Sheldon. I spend most of my time analyzing how ordinary financial decisions quietly decide people's futures, usually without them realizing it. Not the big ones, not the dramatic ones, the small reasonable decisions you barely remember making. If you've ever made a money choice that felt responsible at the time, only to look up years later and wonder why things still feel tight, why progress feels slower than it should, why freedom always seems just a few years away. This is probably about you, because most people don't get stuck by being reckless. They get stuck by following paths that feel normal. Here's the thing. When two people earn the same salary, we assume their financial lives should look similar. If one is doing well and the other is struggling, we instinctively search for explanations. Maybe one is better with money. Maybe one got lucky. Maybe one works harder. But in reality, the difference usually starts much earlier, with a single decision that doesn't feel important enough to question. And once that decision is made, everything that follows begins to line up behind it. Your expenses, your stress, your flexibility, your future choices. You don't feel the impact immediately. You feel it years later, when changing direction becomes harder. Before we go on, tap the like button. It helps this video reach people who are quietly wondering why their financial life feels heavier than it should. And if this way of thinking resonates with you, subscribe. This channel exists to help you see these paths before you walk too far down them. Now let's talk about the decision itself, because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee how powerful and dangerous it really is. The decision isn't dramatic. It's not about investing. It's not about starting a business. It's not about taking risks. It's about how much of your income you quietly lock into fixed lifestyle costs, specifically housing and the expenses that orbit around it. Here's how it usually happens. Two people get the same raise or land the same job. Their income finally feels respectable. Not rich, just comfortable enough to upgrade a few things. A slightly better apartment, a neighborhood that feels safer, nicer, closer to work, a place that feels like progress. And to be clear, this doesn't feel irresponsible. In fact, it feels like the opposite. You're not splurging. You're not buying luxury. You're just choosing something reasonable for your new income level. This is where most people stop thinking, because the monthly number looks manageable. You run the math quickly. I can afford this. It's only a bit more than I'm paying now. I'm still saving something. Everyone I know pays around this. And all of that is true. On paper. What almost no one does is ask a different question. What path does this decision quietly lock me into? Because the real cost of housing isn't the rent or the mortgage payment. It's the chain reaction it triggers. Higher housing almost always brings higher utilities, higher furniture spending, higher maintenance, higher expectations for everything else. You don't notice these increases individually. They blend into your life. Now, here's where the two people split. Person A upgrades their housing to match their new income. It feels like a reward for hard work, a symbol of progress. Person B makes a different choice. Not a dramatic one, not a painful one. They choose a place that's good enough, not impressive, not bad, just intentionally below what they could technically afford. Same salary, same city, same opportunities. At first, their lives look almost identical. They both pay their bills. They both go out sometimes. They both feel normal levels of financial pressure. And if you asked either of them, is your housing choice hurting you financially? Both would say no. This is important. Because the decision doesn't hurt in the short term. It doesn't even feel like a decision with consequences. It feels like logistics. This is why it's so powerful. Most financial decisions that ruin people look reckless. This one looks responsible. And because it looks responsible, it goes unquestioned, sometimes for decades. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Housing is not just an expense. It's a multiplier. It multiplies stress. It multiplies obligation. It multiplies how much of your future income is already spoken for. But you don't feel that multiplication right away. You feel it later, when flexibility matters, when life changes, when opportunities show up that require room to breathe. For now, everything still feels fine. And that's exactly why this decision is allowed to shape the next 10, 20, even 30 years without resistance. Now you might be thinking, so what? Housing costs money. Everyone needs a place to live. That's true. But the difference between these two people isn't where they live. It's how much future freedom they quietly traded for comfort today, without realizing it. And to understand why almost everyone makes the same choice, we have to look at the psychology behind it. Here's the thing. No one sits down and says, I'm going to make a housing decision that limits my future. That's not how this works. The decision feels obvious because it's supported by multiple psychological forces, all pointing in the same direction. The first is social normalization. You look around and realize everyone at your income level lives in a similar place. Some even live in better ones. So the question stops being, is this the right decision for my future? And becomes, why would I live worse than people like me? Once something becomes normal, it stops feeling optional. The second force is identity reinforcement. Where you live becomes part of how you see yourself. It's not just an apartment. It's proof that you're moving forward, that your effort is paying off, that you're not falling behind. Choosing less can feel like denying your own progress, even if the math says otherwise. Then there's adaptation. Humans adapt incredibly fast. The nicer place stops feeling special within months, but the payment never stops feeling real. What was once a reward becomes baseline, and now anything below it feels like a downgrade, not a choice. This is where the trap closes, because once your baseline rises, it rarely goes back down. Now you might be thinking, but housing is important, quality of life matters. And you're right, this isn't about suffering or deprivation. It's about invisible trade-offs. When more of your income is locked into fixed costs, your margin for error shrinks. Small surprises feel bigger. Job changes feel riskier. Time off feels more expensive. But psychologically, you explain this away. You tell yourself, things will get easier as my income grows. I'll figure it out later. This is temporary. Except, lifestyle costs have a habit of rising with income, not staying still. There's also loss aversion at play. Once you're used to a certain standard, the idea of losing it feels worse than the joy of gaining it ever did. So even if you realize the pressure, stepping down feels emotionally painful, even if it would objectively improve your situation. And finally, there's the most dangerous force of all, silence. No one warns you. There's no alert that says, this decision will quietly reshape your future, because nothing breaks immediately. Bills get paid. Life goes on, which convinces your brain that everything is fine. This is why two people making equally reasonable decisions can end up on completely different trajectories. Not because one was smarter, not because one worked harder, but because one decision quietly reduced future flexibility, and the other preserved it. And the effects of that difference don't show up in months. They show up across time. So now let's follow these two people forward and watch what this single decision actually does. Let's follow the first person. Same salary, same city, same opportunities. They chose the nicer place, still reasonable, still within what most people would call affordable. In the short term, nothing goes wrong. The apartment feels good. The neighborhood feels right. Friends compliment the place. Monthly payments go out smoothly. There's still money left over at the end of the month, just not much. And that feels fine, because this person isn't thinking in decades. They're thinking in months. Now move forward a few years. In the medium term, life starts to get heavier. Rent increases. Maintenance costs creep in. Utilities rise quietly. None of these are shocking on their own. But together they do something subtle. They reduce options. This person still saves, but inconsistently. Some months are good. Some months disappear into expenses. Unexpected costs now require adjustments. Vacations are shorter. Job dissatisfaction becomes harder to act on, because walking away from a stable paycheck feels risky when so much of your income is already committed. Now push the timeline further. 10, 15, 20 years later. In the long term, the real cost becomes visible. This person isn't broke. They're functional, but their financial life feels tight. A large portion of every paycheck is already assigned before it arrives. Any major change, a career shift, a break, a relocation, feels expensive and stressful. They feel behind, but can't point to a single mistake. From the outside, their life looks fine. From the inside, it feels constrained. They start asking questions like, why does it feel like I'm always catching up? Why do opportunities feel like threats instead of options? Why does stability feel so fragile? The answer isn't a bad year. It's not one wrong move. It's years of slightly higher fixed costs quietly compounding into reduced flexibility. This person didn't fail financially. They just built a life where freedom was gradually traded for comfort, one reasonable decision at a time. And the most frustrating part? They can't go back. Stepping down now feels painful. Their lifestyle, identity, and obligations are built around this level of expense. So they adapt. They work longer. They postpone changes. They tell themselves they'll feel better once things settle down. But things rarely settle down when most of your income is already spoken for. Now, here's the important part. Nothing about this path is extreme. Millions of people live exactly like this, which is why it feels normal. But normal doesn't mean neutral, because while this person was adapting to pressure, the other person was building something very different. Now let's look at the second person. Same salary, same city, same starting point, but they made a quieter choice. They chose a place that didn't impress anyone. It was clean, safe, functional, and intentionally below what they could afford. In the short term, this decision feels slightly uncomfortable, not painful, just unimpressive. There's no sense of leveling up, no external validation, no feeling of reward, but there's also no pressure. Bills are easy to cover. Unexpected expenses don't immediately create stress, and that difference matters more than it looks. Move forward a few years. In the medium term, something interesting happens. This person's life doesn't feel dramatically different day to day. They still work, they still spend, they still enjoy life, but they have margin. They don't notice it consciously, but it's there. They can absorb rent increases without panic. They can say no to overtime. They can walk away from a bad job environment if needed, because not every paycheck is already promised to the past. Savings grow slowly, quietly. Not because they're disciplined, but because the system makes it easier. Now extend the timeline. 10, 15, 20 years later. In the long term, the difference becomes undeniable. This person feels lighter. They're not dramatically wealthier. They're not living a flashy life. But they have options. Time feels less expensive. Change feels possible. Opportunities feel like invitations, not threats. When life shifts, and it always does, they can respond instead of react. And here's the key insight. This person didn't sacrifice happiness. They sacrificed display. They didn't live worse. They lived with less financial noise, which allowed something powerful to accumulate: flexibility. And flexibility compounds. It compounds into better decisions, better timing, better outcomes. Not because this person is smarter, but because they preserved room to move. Now put these two people side by side. Same income, same effort, same intelligence, completely different financial lives. Not because of one big move, but because of one quiet decision that repeated itself every month for decades. And once you see that contrast clearly, there's an uncomfortable realization waiting. Here's the uncomfortable realization. This had nothing to do with intelligence, nothing to do with discipline, nothing to do with being good with money. Both people were responsible. Both made reasonable choices. Both did what made sense at the time. The difference wasn't effort, it was trajectory. One path slowly narrowed. The other quietly stayed open. And most people never stop to question which path they're on, because day to day, both feel the same. This is why financial frustration is so confusing. You're doing everything right. You're not reckless. You're not lazy. Yet something feels off. Progress feels slower than it should. Freedom feels postponed. Stability feels fragile. And because there's no obvious mistake to point to, you assume the problem must be you. But it isn't. The problem is that small, reasonable decisions stack in one direction or the other. And once enough of them stack up, changing direction feels overwhelming, even if the math says it's possible. This is why people stay in situations they don't like, not because they can't see alternatives, but because alternatives feel too expensive. By the time the discomfort becomes clear, the path has already been reinforced by years of habit, identity, and obligation. So the realization isn't, I should have worked harder, or I should have been more disciplined. It's this. Every financial life is a path, and paths don't ask for permission before they take you somewhere. They just keep going until you stop and question them. Most people never do. They don't fail financially. They just follow a trajectory they never consciously chose. And once you understand that, the question stops being, how do I make more money? And becomes, what kind of path am I quietly building? Here's a simple rule most people never learn, not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. Every fixed expense you add is a future decision you've already made, not just about money, about time, about stress, about flexibility. When a large part of your income is permanently committed, your future self has fewer choices, even if your income grows. This is why two people with the same salary can end up living completely different financial lives. One feels like life is constantly demanding more. The other feels like life is quietly offering options, and neither of them arrived there overnight. Most people don't fail financially. They just follow a path they never stop to question. If this made you rethink a decision you thought was harmless, subscribe. This channel exists to help you see these paths before you walk them. Because awareness doesn't change the past, but it can quietly change everything that comes next.